There's nothing like good conversations, and that's what we like to have here on When Black Men Talk. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Mark Elliott, and we love good conversations, provocative conversations, strong conversations. We continue that on. And to do such, we must bring in people that can bring in provocative conversation, provocative talk, and provocative theories. And one person that's known to do that is Lady Marcy. How are you?
I'm good, darling. How you doing?
Doing well, doing
Happy
very
Thursday.
well.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday to you. Yeah, I appreciate that you take time out of your schedule to set time aside where we can have conversation because life is busy. Life is busy, and knowing you, you get pulled in a lot of different directions. So I'm happy that you find time to join us.
I always like good quality conversations and an opportunity. You always challenge me to think about things and to come on my A game and to be prepared and to show up ready to show
Wow.
up. So I like that. And so I'm always going to answer when you call.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Last time we got together, we talked about general curse and general trauma, and I made a point then, I made a note then that I wanted to do a show around victims and victimhood. And this is that particular show. It's going to be the premise of the show, basically. And I want to start basically with victims in general, because a lot of times I look at current day times and it gets blurred into victims and victimhood. And we'll talk about victimhood later. But I always wanted to keep them separate mentally, and I look at them separate because to me, a true victim suffers harm from an adverse situation, things that are acts that could happen in their lives. So, with keeping that in mind, I try to always stay delicate there. I pray for victims, I pray for healing, I pray for restoration, I pray for peace because I can't imagine if you're waking up with a mentality of trauma, of hurt and pain, and not finding a way to be able to move away from it. Now, knowing you and conversations we had in the past, I know there was a time in your life that you suffered some harm. So I wanted to basically start there and understand, when that happened in your life, what steps did you take to basically move yourself from the mental damage?
So it's funny that you ask, and I was kind of thinking about that when we were sort of discussing, the topic for the show. And when I think about my domestic violence assault, so that happened April 2012, so about 12 years ago. But leading up to that climactic event with one individual, there had been a series of bad decisions, bad dating choices, getting married for the wrong reason, if I want to go all the way back. Um, and it seemed like things kept happening to me, right? And at, for years, you just think, I just can't get this right. And you start having this negative self talk and you think it's you're the problem. Or that, you're just dealt this rotten hand of cards. And so when the domestic violence happened and I was nearly killed, I remember standing in my good friend's bathroom. She was an herbalist at the time, and she's busy making me, these naturopathic remedies and salves and all this kind of stuff to get the swelling to go down, get my eyes to open back up, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember standing there looking in the mirror, and I didn't even recognize who I was. I mean, at the time, like chunks of my hair had been pulled out, and it was just a hot mess. But I was standing there and I was looking at myself, and but all that came to mind was who is this, and how did I get here? How did I get here? Like, I knew better. I knew about domestic violence. I knew, I'd grown up with it in my household with my stepfather and my mom, and so I had this picture of what abuse was. I knew better, and so that's what I kept telling myself. I knew better. So how did I get here? How did I become a victim? Um, and I realized in that moment, it was almost like I challenged myself to not be a victim. And so, in fact, I've, even since then, I typically don't say I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I say I'm a champion of domestic violence. And so I really changed my vocabulary because I think words have a lot of power. What we speak is what we hear, and that's what we're digesting, right? And so in that moment, I was just like, if I don't do something different and I keep making bad choices in dating partners, the next time I might not have the opportunity to wake up. I might not have the opportunity for another chance. And so in that moment, it was really just about refusing to let him win. It was really just this attitude that I had of, you're not going to win. You did this to me, you assaulted me, you nearly killed me, but you're not going to win. You don't get to win this. That's what you can't do. And even to the point of going home that night, and my friend was like, no, just stay at my house, just stay at my house. I said, absolutely not. She's like, well, he broke into your house and, the door. And I said, absolutely not. He does not get to win this. I'm going home to all the mess, the broken wood door frames and everything. I'm going home to it. I'm sleeping there because that's where I live, and he doesn't get to take that from me. He's taken enough. And so it was just it was truly a mental shift where I was angry. I was angry at him. I was angry at myself. Um, but I absolutely refused to be a victim again.
Hmm. I'm listening to you, and a lot of times when people are victims of some adverse act or circumstances, especially if it's caused by someone else, they tend to put a lot of the focus in the blame. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do such, but they tend to blame the other person. And when I'm listening to you, I didn't hear any of that. I hear how you went back and reevaluated how did you end up here? How did you put yourself in this particular situation? And you took ownership of it, which is real interesting because again, one tends to void that area and that space, and they mainly focus on what took place, and from that blame comes. So I'm amazed when I hear you speak, and you as you said, you went back home, you went back to you seen everything, and I understand the anger, but I didn't hear you say anything about blame. That's interesting. So you didn't feel a sense of blaming him more or less.
It wasn't about blaming him as much as it was as I was just so damn hurt. I felt a lot of things. I felt anger, I felt hurt, I felt betrayed, I felt surprised, I felt, I had all of this stuff, but what I knew was I was also incredibly in love with this person. And so there was something there, right? He turned into this monster in this instance, but when I if I was honest with myself, as I thought back over the relationship, we were together for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And when I thought over the relationship, there were red flags. I minimized, I ignored, I made excuses. Um, and so he was showing me all along, even in conversations, things he would talk about exes and things like that. He was showing me, and I was minimizing it. And so I knew that blaming him and feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to fix it. It was going to leave me doing more of what I had already done, which was just going out looking for somebody to fix my problems, or somebody that's going to make me feel good so I don't have to think about my problems. And in this case, it was like, no, like, if you want to live, you're going to have to figure this out, girlfriend. You're going to have to get it together, and not to say that, because I don't want to minimize what individuals go through when they are victimized. So whether it's sexual assault, domestic violence, crimes in the street, whatever the case may be, you still have an opportunity in that moment to refuse to stay in your pain. And I think that was for me that was the turning point. I felt like if I stayed in my pain, he kept winning over and over and over. And he got to re victimize me over and over and over again for every day that I was sad, every day that I cried, every day that I was afraid to go out, every day that I was afraid to do anything. He won every single time. And it was like, I felt like I was letting him win. And so it was really just, I don't know. I don't know if it's a competitive type of a thing, but I was just like, I refuse. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to make sure more than anything that I learn how to pick better partners. I have to get better discernment. I have to learn how to know what a healthy relationship looks like. I realized I didn't even know. I didn't know what I was looking for. I'm just out here dating. I didn't even know.
Mm.
I got married when I was 21 to the guy that I dated when I was in high school. So I'd known him since I was 17. By the time I was out in the dating world, I was 40 years old. I didn't know how to do all of the things that I needed to do in a safe and healthy way because I had never been in a position to. So I had to learn all that.
Here's something. Here's something I'm hearing and I admire. In reality, and honestly, it's rare because people aren't really honest with themselves. As you said, you were honest with yourself, and a lot of times we run from being that. And that kind of coincides when I was saying earlier about the blame. We run from being honest with ourselves. We really do. We kind of avoid. And I mean, this it's just amazing to me when I hear that, and I don't hear that often. And I want to ask about that because where did you learn? How did it come to you at a time when you could have? That's the last thing you could have been was honest with yourself. How did that come to Marcy, Lady Marcy, to where here again at a moment's notice, you stand back and you're honest with you. You're not listening to the naysayers. You're not paying attention to that. You find a way to block all that out and be honest with Marcy. How does that happen?
I have not the slightest, but I will tell you that there was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of tears. There was a lot of quiet time by myself. Um, But what moved me in that moment in that bathroom, I honestly can't tell you, Mark. And what's so ironic is that I also don't know how I got out of the house because he kept slamming the door on my arm every time I tried to open a door, or he would block me or throw me back down or something like that. And so I don't know how I got out of the house. And I think I've shared this with you in the past, but I just remember in the moment when he was attacking me, I remember being on the floor and thinking, you know, God, if you would just get me through this, get me out of this house, get me out of this situation, I will do something with the time that you give me back. I don't want to die here. If you do something, like, just get me out of here, and I'll make it. I'll make it. I won't make you. I won't make you regret it. Um, and so I think, interestingly enough, when we were talking about spirituality previously, uh, that was a pivotal moment, I think, in the midst of the violence. And then again in that bathroom, because that wasn't how I was conditioned to think. I'm telling you, I was conditioned to, like, woe is me, pity party, daddyless daughter, nobody loves me, I'm unlovable, like all kinds of negative self talk. That was my mental conditioning. And so I really don't know what shifted in that bathroom mirror that day, but it was a pivotal moment and it changed my life. And so when we think about things like that and we hear stories like that, uh, I call them God winks. And sometimes uh, he's just going to do something and you don't even realize he's doing it in the moment. You don't realize it until sometimes, way later, that somebody interceded, God interceded on your behalf. And so if I had to say what happened, I feel like that's what happened, because it certainly was not me. It wasn't me conditioned to be that way. And I never felt like I was a strong person like that. But I was just like, you can't win. Like, no, I'm going home. I'm cleaning up my house, get my life together. I'm going to figure this stuff out. gonna do what I gotta do, and I'm gonna hold up my end of the bargain. And I promise God, I'm gonna do something, and I'm gonna do it. I don't know what I was gonna do. I didn't know how I was gonna do it, but I was gonna do something. I knew that.
Wow. Wow. Suffering harm from another or from adverse act circumstances is what we kind of look at when we describe a victim. And it's interesting because there's so many different ways to be a victim. And no one asked to be one for the most part. No one asked. It's just the way things life tend to fall and it kind of falls upon you. But again, you said something that, man, that's pivotal. You know, not staying with your pain. You chose to move away from the pain. And a lot of times, that's the hardest thing to do when you find yourself being a victim is to really find a way to walk away and not basically live with the pain. And there are a lot of victims that are living with pain for years of the act. They just can't basically move away from it. And you know, I was thinking about this today. I remember years ago, I was talking to, and it's not, you know, that this in a sense what I'm going to say. I look at it as being a victim, but in a small way, my mother was telling me how even she was grown at this point, but my grandfather took her out of school when she was doing very well as a young girl and made her work on the family farm. And she wanted to stay in school. So you know, you look at that and you go, okay, she's doing something for the family. But my mother carried that in her entire lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
It lived inside of her and she couldn't shake it. So when we're having this conversation at the time, my mother probably was in her late 60s. So 50 years of carrying that, I'm going to say, of just hanging on to that
Mm-hmm.
and just having that rattled. And what brought her to that conversation is we talked about certain things. And she said to me, Mark, I just don't want to let, you know, I don't want to let things go.
Mm-hmm.
And that was painful for her. It may not seem like it was, you know, an adverse act, but for her, that was painful. And to not be able to release it. And, you know, when what you went through, you made a choice to not to stay in the pain. And a lot of victims, to no fault of their own, kind of remain there. They stay with the pain and not sure, not knowing. And some people tell them basically, you know, work through it. You know, it's going to take time. And you know, I didn't hear that from you. I didn't hear where it's going to take time. You made the choice that oh, no, I'm not going to live with this pain. I'm not going to allow him to win. And I think there's certain times in our life, even we're a victim or not, we forget that we do have choices. We forget we do have choices to do certain things and handle things in a certain way. Because sometimes we're feeling something so strong, we think there's no other option. We think we just have to kind of deal with it. And I love to hear that you said, I'm not staying with my pain. I'm not going to allow this to riddle me. Yes, it happened, but I'm not going to stay there. I want to understand this too, because you went on from there to basically help others. And that right there is huge. That's amazing. Because you could kind of just went away and act like it was, you know, one thing happened in your life. But I want to know what basically drove you from that point to say, I'm going to be something that help others.
You're asking tough questions tonight. So I would say I just knew I had to do something. So that always stayed with me. And I had this disdain for being a victim. Like I really had a disdain for it. In fact, when I was trying to, get my life together and figure out why I do and this, that, and the third, and one of my friends had me she recommended a domestic violence survivors group. And I was like, yeah, no, thank you, but no, thank you. But I didn't tell her that because, she was trying to be helpful. And so I said, okay, yeah, I'll go. But then that was kind of it. And so the day came, it was like a week later, the day came where I was supposed to go to the first session. and she showed up at my job and she took me there. So when I said yes, I had no plan of going, because in my mind, I'm not a victim. I'm not a survivor. Like, this was a one-time thing. That's not me. That's not who I am. So I really have I have really, probably at that time, a really unhealthy attachment to the word victim. And I think I still do in a lot of ways. But I think the pivotal thing for me was when I realized that I could change my life by changing how I think about situations and how I make decisions. And when I learned about setting boundaries, and when I learned about learning how to love yourself first. So I started learning all these things as I'm trying to heal and come through, my own woes and struggles, and figure it out so this doesn't happen to me again. And it was so powerful to me that I realized, like, nobody has to stay a victim. Yes, bad stuff happens to us. Yes, we are victimized, but we don't have to remain in that victim headspace with a victim type of of an energy over us. It's almost suffocating. And so when I realized that that's a choice, and that I could choose not to live that way, I could choose to have a different outlook and a different perspective and a different life. I'm like, well, hell yeah, I'm choosing the different life. I'm not going to choose that. And then when you think about the word victim, victim in itself is a temporary condition. You're a victim in a moment, right? It's something's happening, something is inflicted on us, something is happening to us, someone's done something to us. So we're a victim in the moment. But once we get outside the moment and we're safe and we're no longer in harm's way, we talk about imminent danger, right? We're no longer in imminent danger. If we stay attached to that moment and we stay attached to that victimized space, then we remain a victim over and over and over again. Like with your mom, she couldn't get past it. So that haunted her. She carried that with her. She could never put that down. And I didn't want to live my life carrying all of these regrets. And so for me, it was like, if I can own this, then I can take back some of my power. If I take back some of my power and I get some tools and I get some coping skills and I get some new information, then I can do it different. I can have a different life, even better than the one that I had before. And so once I realized that, I was like, if I can learn this stuff, I'm great at training. I'm great at public speaking. I'm a great teacher. I can teach people how to do this. I can share these skills, because regardless of what what you were victimized as or what you were a victim of, being able to move beyond the pain. I always say there's power after the pain, because you don't have to stay there. And so once you understand, I don't have to stay here, but I might need some help and I might need some tools to be able to move forward. But you got to be willing to make that step and to be able to walk away from that pain, because sometimes people wear their pain like it's a badge of honor. And if that's your mindset and that's where you want to stay, then you're not going to get healed. So you literally have to condition yourself to say, I'm going to go through, I'm going to deal with all the baggage. I'm going to deal with, and I'm going to accept any ownership and accountability that I have in whatever this is. And depending on the situation, random gunshot, you don't have any accountability in that, right? There's nothing you could have done unless you were somewhere where you shouldn't be. But you still have to evaluate all that. But that's the work.
Hmm.
That's what takes time. And so that's what I was like, I can teach this. I can teach this stuff. I can share this information. That's what I can do. That's how I can give back. And so I kind of adopted this survival is a responsibility mentality. And I don't know, I think you probably heard me say it before, but that's sort of my moniker, is that survival for me is a responsibility, because I promised God on that floor that night that if he let me out, I would do something with what he gave me back. And I was blessed for him to be able to show me that these are some things that you can do. And so I started speaking and writing books and all this kind of stuff with the mindset of, if I can just save one, if I could just help one, And so that's kind of where sort of it was an evolving process. Like it didn't just happen overnight. I didn't wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm going to help people. It just kind of evolved into that once I realized that it's nobody has to stay there.
Good stuff. Real good stuff. Because we're put here to help others. And when we can take a situation such as that and turn that into benefiting others, what's more better than that? Or what is better than that? You said something that I've always said in conversations in the past about certain situations and things happen. And some people basically would take a bad situation or somewhat of a semi bad situation and they would wear it as a badge of honor. And it's almost like they take a testimony and they want to kind of show, I've been through this. So look at me and bear me in a certain way. And I'm looking at it like, no, that's not a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that? I never kind of understood that mindset, but it's interesting because that mindset to me is kind of labeled as being victimhood, not basically saying what happened, but kind of taking it on as a badge of honor and carrying it instead of working your way through it, working to restore, working to basically heal and to gain the peace from it. No, you want to carry it and almost basically share with others so they would kind of look at you a certain way. And the word of victimhood itself, a psychological state where someone perceives a state where something happens to them as a victim, but not necessarily is the truth of the matter. So I wanted to take an extensive look at victimhood in a sense, where folks maybe have gone through something. Because nowadays now we have people who say you're acting like a victim or you're playing the victim. And it could be a conversation where someone says something to hurt their feelings and they move into that area of being a victim and the victimhood. And I have a kind of a thought behind this, why that tends to be so attractive to so many people. And I'm going to say this, and I want to get your reaction to it, is because I think at the end of the day, a lot of times we're looking for validation. And sometimes if you didn't get really true validation as you was coming up as a child, you'll take any type of validation. It doesn't matter. And you're seeking to be poured upon in a certain way. And for some folks, either whether it's good or bad, if they can get attention and they could have people feel a certain way about them, they're willing to sign up for it. And there goes the idea of a victimhood. Because sometimes they're in situations where there's no truth to it, but they're rushing, literally rushing to play the victim part of it. Like you've done wrong by me. This has happened. When there's really is nothing to it, but they want to be looked upon that way. So if we're taking a look at victimhood, why does it seem to be attractive currently to so many?
So what comes to mind? So I mentioned the domestic violence survivors group. So it was a 12-week program, but it was ongoing. So you could go as much as you wanted, but from whatever module you dropped in on, you could stay in it till you got all the way back to your module or whatever. And then from there, if you still wanted to come, you could. And so I went, and for the first 4 weeks, I was like still in that I don't really belong here, but I started realizing like, dang, like I couldn't even say my name. Like I literally didn't want to admit that any of this applied to me. Sort of a little bit of denial. But what I learned in that group, I went for about 6 or 7 weeks. I didn't finish the 12 weeks, but what I learned and what I observed in that group, and I'm going to use this as an example because it's exactly what you're saying can happen. So the idea of this is you go to this, you learn, you get some skills, you understand the cycles of violence, that type of thing. And then the hope is that you start healing, right? And so what I observed in that group, number one, I found gratitude there because I listened to these women's stories week after week, and I realized that what I had been through could have been so much worse. Like I got it easy. And so that was for me kind of this confirmation, like, God gave it to me enough, like, let me go through enough that I'm going to change, but it wasn't enough to kill me, and it wasn't enough to put me in their shoes, because I'm still was like, this doesn't, not quite me, but I'm listening. And so what I observed as I started listening to these women week after week, and some of them are talking about how long they've been there. Like, some of them had been coming there for a year. Some of them have been coming 8 months, 9 months, 18 months. And I'm thinking, every single week you come here for over a year. That's over 52 times. If we just say a year, you're coming 52 times to talk about your circumstances and your situation with domestic violence. Everybody has their own journey. So I'm not judging any of these women, and they taught me a lot, and I am forever grateful for what I learned in that group. So I'm not dismissing any of that, but I'm using it to say that sometimes you can go into this space where, exactly what you're saying, where it's victimhood. And so what you find in this space, and it happens oftentimes with support groups if they're not moderated well, but you start finding belonging, you start finding acceptance, you start finding your identity. All of a sudden, these people can relate to you. You may have never had anybody be able to relate to you before, and so they get you. And so now these become my friends, and now this becomes my circle, but our common denominator is our pain. And so it's very difficult to move away from your pain and begin a healing journey if the common denominator of all of your friend relationship at a point is pain, suffering, what you don't have, all the bad things that have happened to you. I watch some of these narcissist groups on Facebook, and it's a lot of that. It's commiserating in their pain. And so there has to be a mindset shift that takes you and says, this is not the thing that I want to do anymore. And if that means I got to walk away from this friend group, this circle that I have developed in order to do that, then I have to be willing to do that. But that's what I found in that group is it took them from what could have been and should have been an opportunity for them to begin the healing process. It took them into victimhood, because that is all they did for a year and a half. Some of them, I think one lady had been coming there for over 2 years. And all they did was cry and talk about their situations. Now, their situations were a little different than mine, because in some cases they had kids with them, they were married to their abuser, some very, very severe traumas. But that wasn't the group to flush that stuff out. They needed psychotherapy. They needed an actual therapist, not just a support group. The support group should be enough to kind of get you started on the right track, and then be able to move you into your next stage of healing. But people get stuck there because they find something there that they were missing. And so they allow that group, or that whatever that thing is that they're cleaving to, whatever their pain was, their pain point, then that becomes the thing that they're holding on to, because that's where they're finding comfort there. They're finding comfort in chaos sometimes.
Hmm. It's Mark Elliott and Lady Marcy inside Elliott's Law from Black Men Talk. And we're speaking about victims and victimhood. And again, I look at them as being totally separate. But at the same time, it's like they can interact from time to time. Do you love podcasts? Have you ever thought of creating your own podcast? What are you waiting for? Get started at podup.com. Podup is one of the sponsors of this podcast, and they would love to someday sponsor yours. Starting as easy as creating an account at podup.com today. Podup has everything you need to run a full professional show with over 35 different tools with AI integration. Get a 7-day free trial with no credit card required and 15% off with code when Black Men Talk 15. Don't have time to start a podcast? Check out podalex.com. Get a team of professional podcasters to do all the website, social media, and editing work for your podcast. Pod Alleys is an agency run by the folks who built the Pod Up podcasting software. Get started with them at podalleys.com. Get 15% off when you sign up with Pod Up or Pod Alleys with code When Black Men Talk. Pod Up and Pod Alleys can't wait to create with you and launch your podcast. You know, going back to the idea of victimhood, sometimes to me it runs parallel with manipulation, and I say that to say a lot of times you can be in a conversation with someone, and if they feel like they're losing the conversation, well, let's take the word conversation out. It could probably be a debate or an argument. Let's go more with an argument. If they feel like they're losing the argument, they may move into a sense of victimhood to manipulate the other person and feeling sorry and kind of taking you away from your point. If your point is really strong and valid, they'll put themselves in a victimhood mentality in the conversation to basically manipulate what's going on. And that's something that I see as very prevalent, very prevalent. Not only with relationships, but in many sectors of life as we kind of know it now, the victimhood mentality is basically a form, it's a tool, it's become a tool to use to manipulate. I might be wrong in thinking this, but I'm willing to get your opinion on it.
No, I think you're spot on with it. And I see that with I'm a substance abuse counselor as well. And I see that a lot with my clients who have, turned to drugs and alcohol and things like that as their escape tool or whatever. And so when you take away the drugs and the alcohol and they're confronted with certain situations or circumstances or choices that they've made, they slip right into that whole victim thing. Woe is me. This is what happened to me in my childhood. And, my mom didn't love me. My dad kicked the dog and whatever. And they want to use that to detract from the real work, which is to deal with all of those things, confront the demons so that they can move forward and live a healthy substance free life. And so I think I see that probably more in that environment. And then I've seen it also with, within my friend groups sometimes. You've got that one friend who everybody's always against her. To your point, she's not getting what she wants. She's not even losing an argument. She's just not getting what she wants. And all of a sudden it slips into something, or then we break, we turn on the tears and, and so it does become this tool of manipulation, and it becomes a tool of distraction and diversion. It becomes a lot of things. And typically if people find that it works, they're going to keep doing what works. And so sometimes as people who are in relation with these individuals, we become enablers because we cave into it, we fall for it. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like, I forgot you went through that. It could be totally unrelated to the situation, but now all of a sudden we're talking about your pain point instead of talking about the issue that we really needed to address.
Yeah, you're right about the enabling part because, yeah, and if you don't enable, then they look at you like there's something wrong with you, like you're heartless. You have no feelings because you didn't play along with the manipulation. And yeah, to me, I've always found that to be rather comical. I want to take a look at there's certain signs of the victimhood mindset. We might have kind of touched base on some of these a little earlier, but blaming others for their life circumstances. And I remember years ago, I'm gonna stop here for a second though, but I remember years ago, there used to be a lot of cats in the neighborhood, and they were living a certain way. And if they realized you were living, if they realized you looked at them and saw the way they were living and kind of questioning in your mind, maybe not even say anything to them, kind of question why they're living that way, they will come out with a phrase that the white man ain't gonna allow me to do X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
The white man, this, blah, blah, blah. And you look at them like, okay. where's the white man? But it was a way to basically blame that character for the way their life circumstances turned out, where their choices that they made. That was a way to kind of link up to it. Like, don't look at me, don't see me for this. Look at that person for the reason why I'm here. And that was that victimhood mindset. Maybe at the time we didn't realize it and we heard people say it, and a lot of people bought into it. They can't do this. No, they're not trying. They're not really trying. They weren't trying. And as you said, some people kind of basically coped to it and felt sorry. Mm-mm. So that's part of that victimhood mindset, blaming others for your life circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
displaying a negative attitude. Yeah, displaying a negative attitude and finding pleasure and feeling bad about oneself. And that may make people pull back a little bit and go, how does someone find pleasure? And maybe pleasure is not the correct word there, but I believe in reality it is. Because what happens sometimes when you're so used to basically feeling a certain way, like life's against you, everything's against you, you start to basically feel comfort in that. And comfort is part of pleasure. So once you get comfortable and you adopt that mindset of where it's not going to work out for me, you're always pessimistic, you got that negative mindset before you even get started, you're finding pleasure and feeling bad about oneself. So when you hear the word pleasure, you go, no, pleasure is supposed to be, something of satisfaction. But you live there so long mentally. That is your comfort. That is your pleasure. And this one, having difficulty examining oneself and making changes. And that to me hits the bullseye
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times we don't want to basically examine ourselves. And as I said earlier, that's what I admire when you said I was honest with myself. We have a hard time being honest with ourselves. And this to me applies to cross the board with victimhood or whatever. A lot of times a situation can happen where we're not going to stand back and be honest with ourselves. We're going to blame everyone else in a sense, or we're going to blame everything else. And therefore, without being honest with ourselves and examining who we are and the role we played, no change comes. There are no changes made. I want to give you a phrase and get your reaction to it. And the phrase is simple, it's real simple. It says, being a victim is temporary, while being a victimhood is permanent, narrated that's created in a sense. Your thoughts?
Well, I think I even referenced something to that earlier, that, being a victim is temporary, you're in that moment. So I 100%, I disagree with that victimhood is permanent. You can choose for it to be permanent, but it doesn't have to be. So to me, when I hear the word permanent, I feel like you can't alter it. And so that's where I disagree with it, because victimhood, in my mind, is a choice in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of it goes back to that accountability where if I stay in victimhood and I can do some blame shifting and I can, you know, dramatize and catastrophize and, blow things out of proportion or be negative or get people to feel sorry for me, then I can stake claim that I'm powerless, that I don't have a choice, that I can't change my circumstance. And I don't believe that when we're talking about things that are related to mindset and even, you know, your environment. People are afraid to move, but it doesn't mean they can't move, right? And so if you can stay in that powerless mindset and convince people that you're powerless, then you no longer feel obligated, or no one expects you to change. They expect you to stay that way. They expect to take care of you. And then that's when we go back into, a lot of times people enable victimhood to people around them.
Yeah. A lot of times too, we can't. I agree with you about the permanent narrative because it definitely can change. It's not necessarily permanent unless you allow it to be,
Mm-hmm.
unless you choose for it to kind of remain there. Again, being a victim is temporary. And if you want to basically work your way through it and find a healing, yeah, it's just temporary. It's a choice that has to be made. Accountability, of course, rolls with that. I want to read something, and it's when I came across this, it was not gonna say mind blowing, but it really kind of it sound it sound harsh when I first read it, and then I was like, no, it's not. It's reality. It's basically God's solution to victim mentality is to face your past and deal with it. Now, you'll find this in Hebrews 12 through 15. Take responsibility for your own actions. You'll find this in Luke 15 through 17. But this is something here to take responsibility for your own actions. We say that, you know, basically face your past and deal with it. We know that's how it should be done. But forgive as you are forgiven. Matthew's 5:12. That's where I think sometimes we can get hung up with with the process because it's hard, and I hate to use the word hard, but it really is extremely hard to forgive someone that has trespassed you. And a lot of times we don't move into that space of forgiveness, but we are to forgive as we has been forgiven. And when I read that, I was like, whoa, not that I didn't know that, but it was like it was right there. And that's something, I think makes it difficult for a lot of people and sometimes allow them to stay in the space where they are. Because how am I to forgive someone that's basically inflict harm onto me? Someone that's basically changed my life circumstances. And I remember this happened a few years ago, and it was like when it happened, you could almost felt the earth move that day it happened. There was a police officer, a white police officer, that shot a black man in his house, claiming that she went into the wrong property. I don't know if you remember that story. That was in Texas
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago.
Gotham John.
Yeah, yeah. And the brother of the officer, I mean, the male that was shot, that died, came to the trial and stood up and said, I forgive her. And the judge basically, if I remember correctly, hugged the police officer when she was sentenced or found guilty. And again, you felt the ground. It was like an earthquake around the world where we just were like, what the is going on? But this young man and his family, when we, not thinking about it, was doing what he was basically told to do and what he should have done.
Right.
And we're so far from it that we don't understand it because in the heat of our emotions, the heat of our anger, that passion and all that's going on, how do you forgive as you're forgiven? How do you put that together? And I'll go back, like I said, what I thought was really brutal was the part of face your past and deal with it. And that's kind of brutal sometimes to say to someone that's really been through something traumatic, face it and deal with it. And people don't like to hear that, but that is kind of the reality. And take responsibility for your own actions. But I want to bring you in on the forgive as you are forgiving and get your reactions to it, please.
Yeah. So I have a really strong attachment to forgiveness, and I'm pretty passionate about that's the only way that you can break free from your bondage. That's how you break the chains. That's how you free yourself from the attachment to whatever the situation, circumstance, or that individual, whatever the pain point was, that forgiveness. And so when, a lot of times people tell you, oh, forgiveness is for you, it's not for the other person. everybody's like, just stop with that nonsense. But what I will tell you is that the individual who has harmed you is not thinking about you. That individual is living their life, however that may be, whether it's in prison or whatever. But more than likely, they're not concerned with how your day is going, what you got going on. Um, they're doing what they need to do. Meanwhile, your life stops. You can't move forward. You're stuck. You're replaying, you're reliving, you're revisiting the situation over and over and over and over again. And so that is why forgiveness is for you. It's not for them, because that's how you free yourself from doing that. When you can honestly say, I'm okay. It doesn't mean that they were right. It doesn't mean that they had a right to do to you what they did. It simply means that you're going to make the choice to start living your life in that moment and no longer allow them to consume all that free space in your head. You're no longer going to let them disrupt your life. You're not going to let them disrupt your happiness. I had to do this with my father and all the anger and hurt that I had been carrying with him as it related to him, because I realized that was why I was choosing partners that I was choosing, because I just wanted someone to accept me. I wanted love. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted, lots of things, but they stemmed from that. And I decided that anybody who would be the way he is, and part of it was I learned some things about him, and but I learned a lot about myself, and I realized that I'm pretty dope, and it's his loss. And so when I stopped thinking about me losing him and I shifted it to he lost me, I was able to forgive, and I was able to drop that bag. With my abuser, when I realized that I chose to stay, even after the red flags, even after the hit in the mouth and the head upside the head and being popped in the lips with the sucker and all these things, all these red flags, I stayed. And then I thought about, I wonder what he's doing today. And I thought about who he was as a person and how he had lived his life as I'd known him. And I'm like, he's probably in the club, kicking it, sleeping with a whole bunch of women, doing whatever it is he does. And I'm afraid to go out of my house. That's not right. I can't accept that. So this was a person that I once loved. So I chose at that point to remember the good parts, accept that the bad parts happened. They're a part of my story, but they don't define me. And I forgave him. And then I was able to stop thinking about, where is he at? Am I going to see him if I go into this store? Am I going to see him if I go, out with drinks for friends, or, so I was able to start living my life again, but it wasn't until I was able to really begin forgiving. And so for me, forgiveness is key, and it is hard and it is earth shaking. And if people are in or have a heart of unforgiveness, or they've never learned how to do the mental shifting that has to take place to do it, it can seem just out of this world. And I remember when that happened, with that case. And yeah, I mean, that was all the talk for months. It was, oh my God, like, who would do that? How could you forgive him? But sometimes that's the only way. I really feel like that's really the only way that you free yourself, because otherwise you stay stuck and attached to them. And like you said,
Yeah.
that God told us to do that. So if we're living biblically off of biblical principles, then like that's literally just the right thing to do. But it's the right thing to do for you. And it really, really doesn't have anything to do with the other person, because you never have to tell the other person they're forgiven, but you got to forgive them in your heart. it stays with you. It doesn't ever have to go to them. I never have to say to any my dad or to my abuser, I never have to say I forgive you. But I know that I have, and God knows that I have, and I've been able to move on as a result of that.
Well stated. Well said. Yeah. Forgive as you are forgiven. I'm gonna say, Lady Marcy, the word for you being amazing is an understatement. It really is because I love how you go inside deep and what you come out with, your thought process, the way you handle situations, the way you view situations, where you're not afraid to basically own a situation. Honest with yourself. I mean, all that, man, wrapped up into a person, it's a lot. It's a lot of goodness. It's a lot of, and I hope from time to time, realistically, you pat yourself on the back and really understand who you really are and your full makeup of who you are. Because a lot of times we could be our own worst enemy. But as I sit here and I listen to you, that's what's coming out of me.
Yeah.
Because the conversation we just had, I mean, really just shows, or not that I needed you to say anything. I knew that about you already. But realistically, when we hear certain things and when we see certain things in people, we should really let them know. We should give them flowers when they could smell it. So it wouldn't be me who I am to feel this and think this and not say that to you. So yeah, pat yourself on the back. Sometimes, when you wake up in the morning, stand up and take yourself a bow.
Thanks for making me
Because
laugh so I wouldn't cry. That got like super deep. I wasn't expecting that.
no man, do that because you have earned it and you've earned more than that. And I can't wait for our next show because the next show we're going to tackle the relationship between men and women. And what I really want to do, I want to look at it a little differently. I want to be where that conversation, I bring the faults of men and you bring the faults of women.
Women have no faults. Are you
And
silly goose? Where did you ever come
and
up
that's
with such a thing? My goodness.
well. If you need some, I'll give you some. I'll tell you a few. But what we do, what we do at that point, we will bring them to the center. And the hope is, and this might end up being two shows. It really just may. But the hope is that we start to see ourselves and our faults. And if we can see ourselves and our faults and understand our faults, and maybe decide to do something about our faults, how much more attractive we're going to be to the opposite sex? How much more entwined can we get along with the opposite sex?
Hmm.
Because I see now we stand at a place where I mean, Mr. Charles said this one time in the show a little while ago. Why is there good people on this side, good men on this side, and they just can't find a way to get together? And probably because we look at the other person, we're always ready to blame. We're pointing fingers and da 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 da, but we don't point the finger at us. So until we individually clean our backyards, we can't expect them to come into our backyard and visit
Hmm.
and be harmonious and really live together. So I want to start there. I want to basically start there. And like I said, that may turn out to be part one and part two. And I'm cool. If even if it's part three, I'm cool with that too. But, there's so much going on now where there's so much blaming. You know, men do this, women do that, da 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 da. And we're put on this earth to be together. We're put here for a reason. And through all that name calling and pointing the fingers and all that, we have forgotten about that. We need each other. We should love each other. And if we're not, we need to really find out why we're not and do something about it.
Hmm.
So, so we're trying to tackle that. I'm not even gonna say try. We will tackle that. I know we can.
All right, I'm gonna start
But
looking up
we'll do
some
that.
faults of women because I don't really know any faults that women have, but I'm sure I'll come up with something.
I think you have a long laundry list. I really do.
I'll scrub the internet for it.
I think I have a long list. But we're going to put a wrap on this one. I thank you for here again, taking the time aside and really, really, really opening up and sharing. And that's not easy. That's not easy. I know, but I love the fact when it's not easy still gets done. So I applaud the fact, you open up and you share and that you're here. I look forward to the next one.
Anytime you call, I'll be here.
I appreciate it. I want to thank those for giving us an ear. This is what we do: provocative talk, provocative conversation when Black men talk. And we'll do it again real soon. Thanks for listening. God loves you. Of course, I do too.